coming back. Welcome to Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey, coming to you from the Washington Post newsroom, and I'm joined by my colleague, senior video journalist J.M. Rieger, political mastermind, watcher of endless hours of Fox News. We are very grateful, J.M., and the person who pretty much knows everything about politics. So thank you for being here with us. We're also joined from Concord, New Hampshire by columnist and editorial writer James Hohmann, who's not so shabby either. Well, gentlemen, the big Trump-Harris debate is just days away, and the last presidential debate was a game changer. The square-off, as we all know, between Donald Trump and Joe Biden back in June set in motion a series of events that led to Biden's shocking exit from the race in July and Kamala Harris's rapid ascension to the top of the Democratic ticket. A lot is at stake in this next debate. We'll talk all about it and preview it. Later in the show, Donald Trump has made headlines on the campaign trail by saying he will vote against a Florida ballot amendment that would overturn the state's 6-week abortion ban. But that was after saying he didn't really like the 6-week limit. It was too restrictive. He's had to do some political cleanup. We'll dive into how the abortion issue is one of the most consequential potentially in this election. And finally, Trump's legal troubles and trials continue, even if it is at a snail's pace. So we'll update you on Trump's legal docket. Let's dive in. Harris and Trump will meet for the first time on stage in Philadelphia on Tuesday night, the heart of a key city in a key state. So many eyes on Pennsylvania right now. I was shocked to realize they had not met before. We learned this during Dana Bash's CNN interview with Kamala Harris, that she had attended like a State of the Union that he gave us, JM, but they haven't actually come face to face.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And as she kind of noted, it was because of how he left the White House in 2021 and how they came in, right? That usual ceremonial passing of the torch, if you will, from one administration to the next didn't happen. And that was one of the reasons they had not met.
Right. So Trump instead, James, staged, or, well, it's debatable if he staged the insurrection. One can argue, and some legal minds are, that he was, instrumental in this attempt to overthrow the results of the election. And then he didn't play nice. Like, he didn't do the typical things that, for example, Barack and Michelle Obama did of welcoming the Trumps to the White House. That never happened. So were you surprised to realize they hadn't met yet, James?
Yeah, I was. I mean, Trump was the first president since Andrew Johnson not to go to the inauguration. And so, that was one of those kind of last norms where, Trump sort of just blew off that whole process and left town. It is kind of amazing because it is also a reminder that Kamala Harris joined the Senate the same month that Donald Trump became president. She was elected on the same day Trump was elected to the Senate. And so, she's not, Joe Biden was in the Senate for 36 years. She was in the Senate for 4 years before she became VP.
What do you think she has to do? We've heard her say on the campaign trail right from the beginning, I know his type. So even though they haven't met, Harris is projecting that she knows Donald Trump's MO. She knows how he operates. What does she have to do, James?
It's sort of a white knuckle strategy. I mean, I think that it's kind of it's a threshold test more than anything. I think it's kind of like, let Trump be Trump and let him make mistakes and just sort of be passable. I'm not sure that that's actually a good strategy, but the strategy is, just look presidential, don't make any mistakes, and get through this. There's talk that there will be a second presidential debate. Both sides sort of are open to it. I would be shocked. Maybe shocked is too strong a word. I would be surprised if there ends up being another debate, because if one side clearly wins or loses, they're not going to have an incentive or desire to debate again. So I think there will be a lot of debate over debates, but I think this is going to be the one showdown between Harris and Trump. And I do think it's sort of the do no harm approach to politics, which was clearly what she was trying to do too in that CNN interview, where it was kind of like, all right, check the box, say we've done this interview. It almost, watching that interview last week, it was like she had prepared for this hard test and gave the answers that she had prepared. And I think that that's going to be sort of what she's looking to do. I think also, she wants to have one or two viral moments. She's trying to excite her base. She's also trying to show that she's focused on issues people care about. But mostly it's just sort of like using Trump as a foil, making Trump seem like the incumbent, and her the change agent. And I think, she's done pretty well at that in a rally sense.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop you there because I want to talk about the dynamics of the debate itself for a moment here. So what do we know about how they'll be set up, JM? And then we'll go back to James for more about like what the candidates wanted. We know it's 90 minutes on ABC.
Yes, 90 minutes on ABC. We know that there will be muted mics. There was this disagreement. Harris wanted the mics to be unmuted. The thinking from the Harris camp was that this would be worse for Trump. When Biden and Trump debated back in June, the mics were muted on CNN. And the thinking at the time from the Biden camp was they want to get the points across, but it ended up being a situation where it somewhat benefited Trump more, right? It prevented him from those interruptions that we saw in that 2020 debate.
Not to interrupt you.
Yes.
It saved him from his worst impulses.
Right.
It saved him from his lack of self-control.
Yes. And Harris is now saying that the Harris campaign saying this is going to put her at a disadvantage, but they've agreed to this muting of the mics with ABC. So in that sense, it's going to be similar.
So James, how transparent was all of this? Like how, because I did notice that the Harris campaign was baiting Donald Trump, kind of trying to put him in the position of like your campaign saying you need to have your mic muted, but don't you want your mic unmuted?
Yeah. Now, they totally were trying to bait him, and it sort of didn't work, because I think, ultimately, this is like, it's one of the most tiresome things to cover in political journalism, like these kind of like back and forth over what the rules are going to be and what the conditions are, and calling the other side chicken, and this happens in every House and Senate and presidential race. So I think ultimately those kinds of things don't totally break through to like regular people who are going to be debate. But that said, I mean, what I think is going to matter more than the moderator or more than the microphones is the moderators. How Dana Bash and Jake Tapper in the first debate, I think, surprised people by really just like letting the candidates talk, not aggressively following up, like letting the show be about the candidates and not themselves. I think to their credit, they got criticized for that by some Biden folks for not like hitting, pushing back on Trump harder.
Yeah, I just want to pause you, James. So what we're talking about there is they were relying on the candidates to fact check each other. So it was not Bash and Tapper's job, as the way they set it out, to fact check the candidates in real time. There was ample opportunity for the candidates to fact check each other because they could have done follow-up. They did do follow-up. And that was one of the great sources of angst among Democrats, because not only were they concerned about Biden's mental acuity in that moment and ability to find the right words, they were like, it's a missed opportunity to fact check Trump and call him out for falsehoods he's saying. So with that being said, what are we expecting, James, from Lindsay Davis and David Muir?
David Muir is the sort of general interest news anchor of ABC's evening newscast. He's not like a Washington insider. He didn't cover the White House or Capitol Hill full time. And he's not someone who's going to sort of be, I don't think he would fancy himself as like a policy person. So I assume that they're going to try to keep the story about the candidates as much as possible. Once again, maybe there will be a little more follow-up. But I think, Kamala Harris is going to be trying to make the points she wants to make, and Donald Trump is going to be trying to make the points he wants to make. And ultimately, each of them is going to be thinking about, like, what are the one or two moments I can sort of create, and then we can, push that in the days after. And so I think that's how they're approaching it. Less like, I don't think Kamala Harris sees her role as, I think she has to show that she's a fighter and that she can like take on Trump and stand toe to toe with him. But I don't think she is going to like get into the weeds of saying like, well,
that would almost drag her down, right?
Yeah,
wouldn't that drag her down, JM, if she's going on Trump's turf, if she gets really involved in like what he's doing and saying?
The real question, I think, going into this debate is how each candidate defines Harris, right? Defines her, because she's the lesser known quantity heading into this debate. So if you're Harris, you want to, as James was saying, position yourself as that change agent. And we've seen with some of the policies that she's rolling out, especially on the economic front, she's trying to give herself a little bit of daylight with the Biden administration, while again tying herself to the popular parts of the Biden agenda.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how she tries to come across, right? Is she the prosecutor? Is she warm? Is she approachable? Let's play a clip of her debating Mike Pence. And we all remember vaguely, do you guys remember the debate between Mike Pence and Kamala Harris?
I remember the fly.
I think
Mike
everyone
Pence's
remembers the fly. Yeah. So let's watch a clip of how Harris dealt with Mike Pence.
The vice president is the head of the task force and knew on January 28th how serious this was. And then thanks to Bob Woodward, we learned that they knew about it. And then when that was exposed, the vice president said, when asked, well, why didn't y'all tell anybody? He said, because the president wanted people to remain calm. Well, let's get no, but Susan, this is important. I want to add, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. I'm speaking.
A moment that I can't believe wasn't more resonant in my mind before we started thinking about how Kamala Harris debates. Some things to point out. If you're watching us on YouTube, you're seeing this. If you're listening to us on the podcast, you obviously don't. But they have dividers, like plexiglass dividers between them, because this was still during the pandemic. And of course, she was talking about Trump's handling of the pandemic. JM, react to that clip for us. And how is it relevant now?
We were just talking about the muting of the mics, right? And right there, there's the exchange. And that was one of her stronger moments of that debate, the exchange, as he was cutting her off, she stepped in, right? Doesn't mean that can't happen. Biden and Trump at the end of their June debate started to step on each other's toes a little bit. You could kind of hear it in the background, right? Even though one of the candidates would have their mic muted at that time. But that sort of dynamic, Harris is comfortable in that space. We also saw her comfortable in that space in those Senate hearings with those judicial and Trump nominees and whatnot. This is where she wants to sort of live. So how that dynamic plays out, if one of them's muted, is the other mic picking it up? I think that's going to be really interesting.
James?
And, what's interesting there is the Senate hearings are an interesting template. I think that is where she's most comfortable, is sort of the prosecutor in the courtroom. She's fully in control. She's asking the questions, but ultimately she's running to be president, not senator. And she does want to sort of rise above the kind of, I'm just trying to go after Trump. And part of the point is that everyone in America has a very established sense of Trump. They like him, they don't like him. Harris is a little more moldable still. And I think both campaigns see this debate as a chance to move Harris's favorable or unfavorable. The Trump folks, think that they have to get her unfaves, as they say, in polling up. And Harris is trying to be sort of likable isn't quite the right word. Presidential might be more of the right word. And so she, I think she's going to do what she did as the attack dog against Pence in that clip. But I would be surprised if she was, too much focused on that. I think she might be trying to talk about her plans, her ideas, her priorities, more than just sort of like Donald Trump is terrible, because I think that they know that voters are sort of set in their views on Trump. So it's not about persuading them.
Yeah. Y'all said something important too. She needs to seem like she's not the incumbent, right? Like she's the challenger. And so what are the words the campaign is using? Joy, we're not going back, like moving forward. So can she show America that she is like, he's the old news, I'm the new fresh news. Pay attention to me. Don't waste your time with that guy. So
she wants to be
she wants to be
the underdog. Like that's the word. She campaigned here in New Hampshire yesterday. I saw her, and she was like, "We're the underdogs in this race. We're fighting. We're coming from behind." And it was right after a bunch of polls showed her ahead in a bunch of states. But I think you want to go into this debate being like, I'm the underdog. Like, hear me out. I'm Goliath, who's Trump. So I think there will be an effort to kind of create that feeling. And that's part of what we're talking about, which is being the change agent.
So what does Donald Trump need to do, JM?
Trump needs to, I mean, this is yet again another quote unquote reset that the Trump campaign is putting out there, right? We've had how many, half dozen or something in the last few months here, right? I don't know that anyone is necessarily expecting Trump to kind of totally stay on message. I mean, he can't even stay on message at his rallies when he has a prompter, right? But if you're Trump, you do need to define Harris. This is your really potentially only opportunity in a debate setting where there's going to be potentially more eyeballs than either of the conventions, right? It's obviously closer to the election to really define her, especially in the ways that he wants to define her, which is sort of tied to Biden and as a left-wing candidate that does not appeal to those kind of moderate, undecided, middle-of-the-road voters, right? That's what Trump wants to do. And then he really wants to go on the attack both on the economy and on immigration, which are still two issues where he's holding an advantage in the polls over her. I do think, you know, how he attacks her and also how she responds to him on those issues might be one of the key kind of takeaway moments, especially as we hear more and more from her on economy, middle class, what she wants to do.
So you spent your Wednesday night, as did I, watching a Trump town hall on Fox News held by Hannity. It was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, a key area of the country, as we've already mentioned. Let's listen to a clip of how Donald Trump talked about the ABC debate that's coming up, because it gives us a sense of how he's trying to frame it and spin it in advance.
John, ABC is the worst network in terms of fairness. They had a poll where I was 17 points down a couple of days prior to the election. I was 17 points down in Wisconsin. They are the most dishonest network, the meanest, the nastiest, but that was what I was presented with. I was presented with ABC, George Slopadopoulos, you know who he is. And he's a nasty guy. And yet, he's a nasty guy. I've had him up to here. I think a lot of people are going to be watching to see how nasty they are, how unfair they are. I agreed to do it because they wouldn't do any other network.
That's Donald Trump speaking on Fox News on Wednesday night at a very supportive and pro-Trump town hall. JM.
This is... one of Trump's comfortable spots is to go to frame the media as an other, right, to go at them. So especially for his base, this plays well, right? And some of those,
it's like
lines,
an old chestnut.
It is. Yeah. It is. We've heard these lines from him. I mean, even the 17-point thing he's talking about a poll in 2016, a week out or whatever it was before the November election there against Hillary Clinton. Again, though, this is him living both in this media context. I don't know if that breaks through to anyone else other than his base. Yeah. And then on top of that, he is really still looking backward, right? And that's been a huge issue for him throughout. His campaign has tried to pivot him to looking forward. So even we were just talking about how he's really struggling to stay on message the way the campaign would like him to. And even in kind of the friendly confines of that Fox town hall, he's still not staying on message.
I mean, I was just noticing that Hannity was doing him so many favors, trying to get him back on issue, back on topic, like focus on the economy, focus on immigration and how terrifying people are coming across the border. And Trump was like going off on tangents. And it was all about Hannity's job to like pull him back to the thing that Hannity thinks is a selling point.
And I think Hannity thought Trump was going to take that opportunity to start contrasting himself a little more with Harris, give a free
instead of just complaining about ABC.
Instead of complaining about ABC to a debate he has agreed to, right? And they agreed also to muting the mics, which the Trump campaign wanted.
So, James, how is the pre-buttal that Trump's giving important or revealing?
He's working the refs. James, absolutely right. It's like the othering. It's trying to make the media a player in the game rather than the neutral arbiter. But he also is trying to kind of, I think, brush the plate for ABC so that they don't, they don't aggressively fact check him. I think if you're whining about the rules and the moderators, you're losing a debate. And I think that's, any debate coach for either side would say, like, voters don't care about, like, oh, I didn't get my full 90 seconds to respond, I need this rebuttal. Like that, you have to transcend that and go higher. And Trump is animated by grievance. It is what he cares about. I mean, he sees any slight as not just an attack on him, but as like an attack on his movement that should galvanize and excite people. But it doesn't. And it's always it's such an easy trap to fall into for candidates in both parties. And that's, what Trump is doing. His advisors don't want him doing that. Hannity doesn't want him doing that. It's not a winning message. So
last week on Sidebar, we talked about how Trump had a really erratic and sort of off the rails period on social media, on his Truth Social feed, where he was saying really like misogynistic, super offensive things about women, about Kamala Harris, about Hillary Clinton, resharing disgusting memes and stuff like that. What are his advisors telling him, James, about how he acts around a woman of color who could be the first woman president of the United States? Like, how does he contrast himself with her while, what are they telling him about how to act?
Yeah, I mean, they're telling him, they're telling him not to focus on identity and, to basically ignore the race and gender, just as Harris's advisors are too. They didn't want him talking about how, Harris is mixed race and she identified as Black later in life. That kind of thing is not
none of which is true, right? But yeah, that's not,
it's not true. Certainly,
that's, she is mixed race. But yes, the thing about not assuming her Black identity until later is ridiculous, right? Right.
It is. And so, and it's a politically unhelpful argument. There's 35 million mixed race people in the country. But I think they're saying if you can keep it on what James said, the border and the economy, those are two issues where he has an advantage. Those are two top concerns of voters. If you're, and I do think there's a recognition that like Trump has sort of been listless since Biden dropped out of the race. And so there is a feeling that, we need to shake this thing up. We need to kind of like inject new energy. We need to put Kamala Harris on the defensive. And so it's not that he's not going to throw punches. He will. But what his aides are telling him is that those should be policy based. And even in 2016, like he had some very strong moments against Hillary Clinton talking about the economy and the border and immigration. And, those got overshadowed in a lot of the post-debate coverage by the crazy stuff that he said. And also the body language, this time they're both going to be behind podiums, but remember in 2016, like Trump like awkwardly walked up behind her and like got in her personal space. And, he does need to improve his standing with female voters.
So James, are we in danger as the media of setting too low a bar for Trump? And if he can just do the basics, like stick to the message of the economy and immigration of, the media writes this narrative the day after, we're certainly not immune from that. How is the framing important for what we all expect going into it?
Yeah, always. I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges for covering Trump because, we haven't even talked about the fact checking. We talked about Kamala Harris's role being the fact checking, but like, it's a very hard thing because Trump is going to make a mind-blowing number of false statements in the debate. And, you can spend all your time just like analyzing and parsing his false statements. You want to note them. You don't want to give more oxygen to false claims. So I do think the bar is low for Trump. But I also think, honestly, the bar is pretty low for Kamala Harris too. The expectations for her in the debate aren't super high. And so there's a scenario where both sort of like exceed the expectations and this ends up not really moving the needle. Certainly it won't move the needle the way the June 27th debate did.
I want to play another clip from Fox News on Wednesday night. This is how Trump was talking about his opponents, notably Tim Walz. Let's roll that tape.
Let me play. There's something weird with that guy. He's a weird guy. JD is not weird. He's a solid rock. I happen to be a very solid rock. We're not weird. We're other things perhaps, but we're not weird. But he is a weird guy. He walks on the stage. There's something wrong with that guy. And he called me weird. And then the fake news media picks it up. That was the word of the day. Weird, weird, weird. They're all going.
Donald Trump trying to defend himself and cast the weird mantle on Tim Walz.
Again, we hear Sean Hannity trying to
so
pivot,
hard. Yeah, come back, Trump, come
pivot
back.
to more tangible issues, and then Trump kind of takes it on this sidebar on Walz and weird. And this is yet again this just kind of muddled all over the place messaging from
But
Trump.
is it a sign that he's like lost his focus? Like James was saying, listless was kind of a good word, right? That like it's such a tangent. It's such a weird place to go. It's like
He doesn't.
I'm rubber, you're glue. Whatever, you know. It's like a.
Yeah, he hasn't figured out how to turn this back into, right now this election has really turned into a choice, and that's better for Harris. He hasn't really found a way to A, get an attack line to stick on her, and B, to really tie her to the Biden administration. And that's kind of a huge issue for him. On top of that, because he has been so backward looking, and he hasn't really, as much as we've talked about how Harris has been light on policy, Trump has been light on policy, and he hasn't been as future looking as the campaign. And that's one of the reasons I think that all these Project 2025 attacks from Democrats have actually stuck, because that's a future looking attack, and Trump has not found a good way to counter that when that's been thrown out.
James, I don't think you are weird at all, just so you know.
Well, what's funny is it shows that the attacks are getting under Trump's skin. I mean, it's so like kind of validating for Democrats and Tim Walz that this branding clearly has stuck. It clearly is driving Trump nuts, and is in his craw, and
it's almost reinforcing it. Like him saying it over and over is like reinforcing it. It's like sticking in people's brains more.
Yeah, I mean, saying like I am not this other thing is always never a good
You
way
never want to be in that
put
position.
it out of people's minds.
Right,
Yeah,
right. It's so true. It's so true. Well, we will be covering the debate live. ABC is hosting it, but we will also be doing a pre-show about an hour beforehand. So tune into the Washington Post starting at 8 o'clock on Tuesday night, 8 o'clock Eastern time. We'll be on YouTube. We'll be on the Washington Post homepage, and we'll be broadcasting, simulcasting the ABC debate. Very much looking forward to everyone's analysis. James, JM, Rhonda Colvin, and others will be with me digging into all of it. So I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a fascinating moment in American politics. Stay with us here on Sidebar. Up next, we'll be talking about the issue of abortion and how that is playing into the campaign. This is Sidebar from the Washington Post. Well, after fumbling a few times, Donald Trump says he will vote against the Florida ballot measure that would overturn the state's 6-week abortion ban. James, first he would, then he wouldn't, then he wouldn't, then he would. What is going on here?
Trump used to be really strongly pro-choice. I mean, in the 1990s, he was it's sort of amazing how he has evolved on this issue. And I think this is something where Trump has publicly said that Republicans underperformed in 2022 because of the abortion issue. I think Trump wants it to go away. I actually was struck. I covered a Republican congressional debate just a little ways from here in this open New Hampshire seat. Annie Custer's retiring. And these three Republicans all were like embracing the Trump position, which is that abortion should be left to the states and that there shouldn't be any federal law. And it's a testament to, one, how much Trump dominates the party, but two, how hugely problematic this issue is in states like New Hampshire. You have even, the fringe candidate in this House race saying, oh, no, I don't want any federal abortion ban. And I think this is Trump's struggle to deal with it, which he's trying to thread a needle. He's threading it poorly. I mean, remember in 2016, he gave that interview to Chris Matthews where he said that women should be punished, that there should be some kind of punishment for women who access abortion. And then he backed off the next day. Ultimately, I think it's just a reflection of Trump is not actually like a is taking credit and deserves credit or blame for the fall of Roe because he did appoint the justices who did it. But I think he is this isn't who he is naturally. And so that's why there's this phoniness and the flip-floppery, because he's trying to be all things to all people. He doesn't want to piss off the social conservatives. He wants the real middle of the road.
Right. So he has gleefully taken credit, though, in the past for being the person who got the Supreme Court justices on who have overturned Roe v. Wade. And I had to remember back to 2016. I remember talking to some voters in Pennsylvania and the suburbs of Philadelphia who did not like Donald Trump personally, but they were single issue voters. They wanted Roe v. Wade overturned. They wanted conservative Supreme Court justices, so they were going to hold their nose and vote for him. And that was a clear message that he had in the campaign. They were anti-Hillary for that one reason. And it's like the dog that catches the car, right? It's like they did it, and now they've got to suffer the consequences or deal with the fallout. Let's listen to some of the tape that shows how Trump's struggling with this.
Florida, the state that you are a resident of, there's an abortion-related amendment on the ballot to overturn the 6-week ban in Florida. How are you going to vote on that?
Well, I think the 6 week is too short. It has to be more time, and so and I've told them that I want more weeks.
So you'll vote in favor of the amendment?
I am going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks. Look, just so you understand, everybody wanted Roe v. Wade terminated for years, 52 years. I got it done. They wanted to go back to the states. Exceptions are very important for me, for Ronald Reagan, for others.
Donald Trump talking to a reporter who seemed to catch him in a moment, JM, where it wasn't like a guarded, controlled. I mean, this is the beauty of journalism, right? You get the candidates and you finally get to ask a question that he didn't quite seem to be able to answer. Now, to be clear, the ballot measure would overturn the state's 6-week abortion ban. So it's not like you get to pick a week. Like, that's what it is, JM.
Right, exactly. And this is Trump. James just mentioned it. Trump knows that this is one of the main things that cost Republicans in 2022, the issue of abortion post the Dobbs ruling. That issue is still on the ballot this November, and Trump has not figured out yet, at least, how to tackle this issue, because he knows he needs the pro-life evangelical voters. They are key to his base, but simultaneously, he knows he needs to broaden this a little bit because of that ceiling issue we keep talking about with him.
But does he already have the evangelical conservative voters, right? Is that part of the struggle, is that he has them no matter what? And so he's got to figure out if he can get other people on board.
Right. Well, and the other thing is he likes to take credit for overturning Roe, right? Because he appointed the justices that were part of that majority. But then simultaneously kind of wants to walk even when he's in kind of easier questions that aren't ballot measure, right? Like, would you sign a federal abortion ban, right? Vance said last week, I believe, that a Trump administration would not sign a federal abortion ban. But then Trump had an interview with the Daily Mail last week and sidestepped the question on it. I don't think because Trump is inclined necessarily to sign an abortion ban, but it's this weird, he doesn't even necessarily know in easier teed up questions for him how he wants to, depending on what audience he thinks he might be speaking to, right? And that seems to be sort of at the crux of all of this, right?
James, I'm so curious to see how this issue comes up in the ABC debate. And what are you going to be listening for, and how are Democrats using the issue at this moment? Are they being successful with how they're using it?
Democrats are trying to broaden it beyond abortion, and they're trying to make it about IVF and access to contraception. There's a lot Trump can do related to abortion, like personnel is policy. The person that Trump puts in charge of the FDA matters hugely. And Trump has a history of flip-flopping and lying about what he's going to do. And so Trump saying, I'm not going to do anything, but then putting someone at, the general counsel of the U.S. Postal Service becomes an important job. What if they decide they want to enforce this law from the 19th century, the Comstock Act, that basically, to cut down on mailing of mifepristone? Trump has said he's not going to do that, but what if he appoints someone who does a bunch of things things to make that happen. And so I think Kamala Harris will try to make it broader than just abortion. Something really interesting happened in North Carolina, which has come back kind of in play since Harris became the nominee. She went down there on the anniversary of Dobbs 2 years afterwards and gave a whole speech about abortion rights. But then what her campaign discovered was that there are a lot of like African-American voters who are actually socially conservative African-American men that they want to win, who don't either care about the issue or don't share her views. And they found at their phone banks that it wasn't coming up as one of the top issues people were raising. And so there is this tension for Harris where I think she's nervous about being defined as like the abortion candidate because she needs all these voters. It's certainly a winning issue for her, and she's not going to like stop talking about it, but it does require a little bit more care, I think, than Democrats are able to get away with in 2022 when it was just like raw anger about the decision.
And can they expand it to IVF and other fertility treatments and things like that, like more of a family autonomy issue? Well, we'll see once again how that plays out at the debate. One more segment left in Sidebar. We're going to look at Trump's legal cases. That's up next. This is Sidebar from the Washington Post. We're taping on Thursday, September 5th in the afternoon. Earlier today, Judge Chutkan had a hearing here in Washington, D.C. about how to proceed in Donald Trump's federal election interference case. This is related to January 6th. So let's talk about these requests and filings from each side. James, what was Jack Smith's team presenting to Judge Chutkan? What was Trump's team presenting to the judge, and what does she now have to decide about the timeline going forward?
Basically, this is all the impact of the Supreme Court's immunity decision that they released on the final day of the term and figuring out how much you can still move forward with. And so, one of the big fights at today's hearing was over the communications between Trump and Mike Pence. And so Trump's lawyers were saying, well, the Supreme Court said that all of those conversations are official acts. And Judge Chutkan said, no, that's actually not true. It explicitly doesn't say that. So that basically Trump's lawyers want to fight everything out separately and have 1,000 different hearings. Jack Smith wants one hearing where they go through all of their arguments. They had this superseding indictment, which means they replaced the previous indictment. So like Jeff Clark, who was at the Justice Department, is no longer being charged because that is now covered by the Supreme Court immunity decision, the stuff he was doing at the Justice Department. So Jack Smith has tried to pare it down. Judge Chutkan, in some cases this morning, seemed sort of like frustrated that Jack Smith wasn't pushing harder and wasn't driving a tight schedule. And he's sort of like, whatever you think, let's have this hearing. And it's clear everyone just sort of expects this is going to drag out past the election now. And so the sense of urgency from before is gone. And in fact, Judge Chutkan said, I'm not going to pay attention to the election as part of the timeline, but there's clearly no rush. And even she said she's not going to schedule like an official trial date because this is going to get appealed to the Supreme Court again. Whatever she ends up deciding on what's covered by immunity, no matter how narrow, Trump's going to appeal and say, no, this isn't right. And so that's totally. Yeah, we can't even schedule the trial yet.
Yeah, Devlin Barrett said something great on our episode last week of how Jack Smith is trying to walk this line between Judge Chutkan and the Supreme Court, because usually you're arguing for the judge and you're thinking strategically about what will appeal to her legal sensibilities, but he has to have this totally split dynamic right now where he has to think about her and he has to also think about this super conservative majority Supreme Court. It's just fascinating to see how everyone proceeds. Let's talk about sentencing. That's still on the docket, JM, for September 18th. It is coming up. Judge Merchan in New York is still weighing the most recent Trump motion to dismiss that case. It's not going to move to federal court, though. What are we watching for?
The question now at this point, the Trump team has asked that he delays Judge Merchan delays sentencing till after the election, right? So there is a chance that that gets delayed till after the election. We will know. It's supposed to be September 18th, so we're roughly 2 weeks away here. Trump could face anything from kind of a slap on the wrist to probation to months or even years in jail. I mean, all those things are potentially on the table here, but this is the political question here is if Judge Merchan sentences Trump on September 18th, then that means you're going to have that in voters' minds to a degree at least before the November election, and then obviously do the inverse. If that sentencing is delayed till after the election, voters won't know whether Trump is potentially being sentenced to jail when they go to the ballot box and vote for him.
Yeah, and it could have so many impacts that we can't even predict, James. I mean, if he is given a harsher sentence, it could really enrage and motivate his base. If he's given a slap on the wrist, it could, sort of make people feel like it's no big deal. Like there's a lot of outcomes that could have political ramifications, James.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch how Democrats have sort of like turned their attention away from the cases. I watched Kamala Harris's rally with Joe Biden in Pittsburgh for Labor Day on Monday, and a guy started heckling in the audience like, Trump belongs in jail. And then Harris said, let the courts figure that out. Like, let's vote. Our job is November. The courts, and she was trying to kind of like, this isn't about, you notice in Harris's stump speech, she's not saying Donald Trump has 34 felony convictions. He's a convicted felon. I think that people again know that, and they're trying to, in contrast from a year ago, I think because this did end up helping Trump bafflingly, I think everyone was sort of surprised by the degree to which Republicans really rallied around Trump after the indictments. And so I think Democrats are being sort of cautious in the way they talk about the cases.
I have seen a lot of mugshot pro-Trump T-shirts in the important battleground state of Pennsylvania. So I'm not sure if you're seeing many out in the wilds of New Hampshire, James, but yeah, it's still being used. The cases in Florida and Georgia still have motions being weighed, so that is still in like the slowest turtle race ever. So we'll continue to cover those as they evolve. Thank you so much, James, for joining us from New Hampshire. We got a sense of what you're doing, but you're actually in the state capitol right now?
I'm inside the state capitol. It's
in the building.
Oldest, I'm actually in the press room right in the state capitol, right next door to the governor's office, right below the Secretary of State's office. It's this old building. It's the biggest legislature outside of Congress. There's 400 House members here. It's a citizen legislature. They each only represent like 3,000 people. They get paid $100 a year. I've had various meetings here in the state capital of Concord today, and there's we're all focused on the general election, but the last primaries of the year for governor and the U.S. House are next Tuesday, the same day as the debate here in the Granite State.
Okay, but you can't stay there for the you got to come back. We need you on Tuesday. Okay, we need you.
I will be back.
Okay, good. Well, we look forward to seeing you and covering the debate with you. Thank you so much to James and to JM. I'm Libby Casey. That's it for this episode of Sidebar. We will see you next week.